There are choices where just one misstep can shatter the family you've tried so hard to protect. And there are fathers whose single sentence can tear open the heart of the child they love the most. If you marry her, then from this day forward, you are no longer my son. Those words, like an invisible blade, slashed straight through the fragile peace James and Diep had just begun to build. From here on, the door of their little home no longer opens to happiness, but to the fiercest battle between love, pride, and wounds too deep to name. If this story touches your heart, please like and subscribe so you don't miss the journey of James and Diep. Late afternoon in the office. The room was so quiet one could hear the smallest of sounds, the soft hum of the air conditioner, the faint tapping of fingers on a keyboard, the whisper-thin rustle of papers being turned. James sat before his laptop, the pale blue light casting shadows across a face lined with exhaustion, after days spent worrying about the new house. He had just finished sending an email when his phone vibrated, an international call. It was his father. In that instant, James's eyes changed, as if someone had suddenly snuffed out the small flame burning quietly inside him. He answered. His father's voice came through the line, deep, cold, stripped of any warmth. "James, I heard you're planning to get married?" James tightened his grip on the phone, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Yes, Dad. Diep and I..." His father cut him off, sharp, without a heartbeat of hesitation. "Cancel it." James froze, a chill running straight down his spine. "Dad, I can't. I love her." For the second time, his father didn't let him finish. "If you don't cancel it, I sever all ties with you. From today onward, I no longer have a son named James." No yelling, no anger, just words spoken softly, yet cruel as stones dropped into icy water. James stood motionless. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from the blow delivered by the very man he had spent his whole life striving to make proud. His breath faltered, as if his lungs had forgotten how to function. He set the phone on the desk, but his hand remained there, frozen, as if letting go would mean letting his entire life shatter into pieces. The grand hall of the Tran family was always spacious, but today it was so cold that even Mrs. Huen could hear the faint tremble in her own breath. The white stone walls reflected the soft yellow lights. The emptiness of the room made every sound echo like a hammer striking metal. Thud, thud, thud. Mr. Tran's footsteps entered from the main doors, heavy, sharp, as if carrying a storm with him. Mrs. Huen looked up, her heartbeat stuttering. She knew this anger. She hadn't seen it return in years. Mr. Tran stopped in the center of the hall, whipping around to face his wife. His voice erupted, needing no lead-in, no restraint. "Is this how you've taught our son? Where is the honor of this family?" He, a boy who studied abroad, a businessman, the future of our entire bloodline, and you let him marry some girl who's already been married once? And now she's dragging some child into it? Every word he spat was sharp as a blade, cutting into the walls, the air, and the heart of anyone listening. Mrs. Huyen stepped back slightly, her voice small but firm. "Honey, Diep is a good girl. Our son loves her. I think she deserves..." Before she could finish, he roared, "Deserves?" The sound exploded through the hall like thunder. "Do you know what people will say? Do you know they'll laugh in your son's face? A man like James, marrying a woman who was abandoned once already. He's dragging our family status down into the dirt. Do you understand?" His voice wasn't only anger. It was fear. Fear of judgment. Fear of losing the flawless image he had spent his entire life crafting. Mrs. Huyen swallowed back a sob. But he's happy. Honey, it's his life. Mr. Tran slammed his hand onto the armrest, the sound ringing out cold and hard. Happy my foot. I forbid it. And if he marries that girl, he has no connection to me anymore. The words were deadly, so cold that even time seemed to stop. The lights in the hall cast shadows across Mrs. Huyen's face, pale, twisted with pain. She couldn't hold it in anymore. Tears broke free, falling in heavy drops, as if each one was a piece of a mother's heart cracking open. Why would you say that to our own child? Her voice fractured, barely forming a full sentence. But Mr. Tran didn't respond, didn't look at her, didn't look back at his own home. He turned and walked away, long, cold strides, the same way he had entered. The massive doors slammed shut behind him. Boom, reverberating through the hall like the end of an unjust trial. His silhouette disappeared behind the glass. Outside, the sky darkened. Storm clouds gathered slowly, as if foretelling the tempest waiting for this family. A father using pride as his armor, because he is afraid. Afraid his son will drift away, afraid of losing the authority he has always held. But the price of that pride is wounding the very child he loves the most. The road up the hill that day felt longer than ever. James drove without music, without a word. Only the wind slipping through the window seams and the pounding of his heart, wild, uneven, as if it wanted to break free from his chest. Diep sat beside him, her hand resting on her lap, fingers tightening just slightly. She didn't dare ask. But sometimes, silence is far more frightening than tears. The car stopped at the familiar hilltop, the place overlooking the golden valley under the evening sun. The sun touched the mountainsides, spreading into a soft, honey-colored glow. Beautiful enough to make one believe the wind could carry every sorrow away. But inside James, there was no peace, only storm. He stood by the car, staring down at the valley, his breath heavy, as if he had been running through a journey far too long. Diep stepped closer, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. James, what happened? James turned around. His eyes were red, as if he had just swallowed a handful of thorns. My father, a breath broke, will disown me if we get married. The words fell to the ground like a stone dropping into a bottomless abyss. Diep stepped back, her hand slipping from his. Her eyes widened, tears rising instantly, as though someone had pressed into a wound still trying to heal. James, I don't want to be the reason you lose your family. If because of me everything falls apart, She didn't finish. James stepped forward and held her hand tightly. His eyes looked at her as if she were the only choice he had ever wanted. And then he did something she never expected. James knelt down. The wind on the hill suddenly stilled. Every sound seemed to freeze in place. Behind them, the sunset was heartbreakingly beautiful. He opened a velvet box. The last golden light touched the small ring like it was touching a vow. Diep. His voice trembled, but it was clear. You've already turned down my proposal twice. And this time, I hope you won't say no. Diep stood there, every part of her shaking as if she couldn't breathe. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes reddening, unsure whether to cry or smile. Because happiness is never just happiness. It is mixed with fear, hope, and a pain only the two of them could understand. James slid the ring onto her hand, the hands that worked the fields, raised chickens, chopped vegetables, the calloused hands he had loved since the first time he saw them. The ring glimmered like a tiny light fighting against the fading day. Diep burst into tears, silent tears. 2 rings, 1 promise, and in exchange, a price that could tear an entire family apart. James stood up and wrapped her in his arms. Below them, the valley was peaceful. But on the hilltop, 2 people were preparing to walk straight into a storm neither of them wanted. Yet they still held each other's hands. And that is what makes this story hurt, and beautiful in a way you can't look away from. James came home when the sky had already fallen into darkness. The living room lights glowed a pale yellow, spilling onto the floor that looked cold and polished like glass. He walked slowly, each step heavy, as if he were passing through the scattered pieces of his own childhood. Inside the room, Mr. Tran sat alone. No television, no conversation. Only the sound of pages turning in an old photo album, the album James used to lie next to his father with, pointing at each picture and asking, "Dad, how old was I here?" For a brief moment, Mr. Tran's eyes weren't as cold as usual. They softened, just slightly, when he looked at a photo of little James hugging a toy, smiling so brightly his eyes curved like 2 tiny commas. But that softness lasted only a single breath. The moment he heard footsteps outside the door, he closed the album. Every trace of tenderness vanished as if it had never existed. James stood before his father. He tried to stay calm, but his breathing trembled. "Dad, about yesterday. I want to make things clear." Mr. Tran didn't look up. His voice was cold, sharp, each word slicing through the air like a blade. "If you marry her, I will no longer acknowledge you." The words echoed in the vast room, harsh as a hammer striking a nail. One sentence, but it felt like a shot fired straight into the heart of the person standing before him. James clenched his fists. His throat tightened as though someone were squeezing it shut. But his eyes did not waver. "You can be angry. You can disagree." He inhaled deeply. "But I choose her." That moment made the whole room tilt. Not because James was shaking, but because it had been so long since Mr. Tran heard his son stand against him. Mr. Tran stood up, his back straight, his gaze icy, so cold he no longer resembled a father, only a towering shadow of power that had given orders his entire life. "Get out." James didn't move. Part of him wanted to scream, wanted to grab his father's hand and tell him he was still the same little boy, the one who wanted his father to be proud of him. But the other part, the stronger one, was the love he had for Diep. Mr. Tran repeated himself, heavier, clearer, leaving no room to return. "I said, get out." James looked at the man who had raised him all these years, the man who once carried him on his shoulders, who held his hand while crossing floodwaters, who used to be his greatest source of pride, and now was the first person to cut him away from this home. James bowed his head slowly, not in surrender, but because the pain was too sharp to let tears fall where his father could see them. He turned away. The door behind him swung open. A gust of cold air drifted in from the hallway. As James walked out, his shadow stretched across the floor, then shortened, then disappeared beyond the doorway. The door closed behind him. Thud. A simple sound, but it marked the border between 2 separate lives, On one side, his family. On the other, the woman he loved. James stepped out of the house, uncertain if he still belonged to it at all.